Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 197. I'm Enigmius and today we're continuing with the Discovery build, the Discovery Hybrid build. The saucer section looks pretty darn close to the Discovery's saucer section in a voxel kind of way. The main body of the ship doesn't look very much like it at all, but the nacelles will look very much like it. And I decided today to do something a little bit different with how we approach this, because there's so many different things going on, trying to duplicate something as opposed to simply just making it up on the fly. And some of the things that I've been doing I decided might be useful to some of you in order to make sense of some of the more complex shapes. If you've got something that you want to, say, import into the game, so to speak, build something that exists outside of the game, there's some tricks to make it easier. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at some of the things I've done since the last episode, just very quickly, the layout that we've done, and then we're going to look at some of those details and how we can get a pretty good sense of where we need to put things to get the basics in place, and then resume our focus to what's going on in-game and make it all happen. So the first thing that I did since the last episode is I got rid of the support arms that we had originally put in place and put new ones on a downward slope, like I talked about. That was something that I had more or less decided before I had even finished recording the episode. It was something that became clear once I got the original one in place with the upward slope and how high it would have to be to get clear of the saucer section, with the nacelles being as large as they are. So that's what I did. And I did kind of an angled approach up there towards the body, just to give it a little bit more structure, a little bit more robust look to it. Other than that, it's the identical patterns being repeated, just up instead of, or sorry, down instead of up. The other thing that I did is I took all of those blocks that we placed that showed the dimensions, the rough dimensions of the nacelles, and I moved them, which is to say I put new ones down and removed the old ones. But I oriented them so that the center of the nacelle would be pretty much where I want it here. I don't have to worry about moving it up or down or side to side. But also it's kind of extending down on the same angle as all this other stuff. You can see these blocks here, the ones that I used to help position it. The reason being, I realized that a lot of the success or failure of the appearance of the nacelles is going to come down to how they join up to the rest of the ship. I mean, obviously, if the nacelles themselves look like crap, they're going to look like crap. But even if they look good, even if we got a very good replica or duplication of the Discovery's nacelles, if we didn't have them connected properly to the rest of the ship, it would make them look pretty awkward and awful. So I decided that I would follow it down on the same angle to the center, and then when we build the nacelles, all I'll have to do after the nacelles are done is come back and just kind of fill in around this area here so that it connects properly and everything is filled in. It won't take much, but I think it's a big step in the right direction. Outside of that, basically, that's going to be the nacelle. If we can, there we go. The end of the front side. They're big. They're very, very big. And that's why I kind of wanted to take a little bit of time and do some measuring and figure out exactly how I should approach the design and the layout to get me started on the, in the right direction. And to do that, we're actually going to switch over to Google Sketchup for just a relatively brief look at what I've done so that you can see where all of this information comes from. And like I said, this is useful information if you want to try and duplicate something and create a ship in the game that exists outside of it. So here we are in SketchUp. This is the drawing, the design diagram, whatever you want to call it, that I've been using for this whole build. And the benefit of doing it from one design like this is that everything is consistent. And once I got it loaded into SketchUp and started measuring off of that, I could come back to it whenever I want and not have to worry about the scale being off and having to redo the scale and redo all of this stuff. It's just all very consistent, all where it needs to be. very handy. You can do this with, this is actually an image imported into SketchUp. So it's not even a drawing in SketchUp. It's just like a background image. Makes it very easy to work with. Just before I get started into the whole measurement scenario, I wanted to just point out, for anyone who has not seen the series yet or is wondering why I'm making such a big deal about having the body different from the actual Discovery, this is the actual Discovery's body, obviously. And if you look at the distance from here to here, basically the front of the saucer section to the back of the saucer section, it's about the same as the distance from the back of the saucer section to the back of the ship. And then from there, it goes back even farther for the nacelles. And right now we're looking at the back of our ship is right about here, and the nacelles are extending back to about here, and we're out of space. We can't put another block on the back end of this thing without being told that we're too far from the core. We're at the outer limits of how far we can place anything. So that's the explanation, in case anyone was unclear. Specifically to the point, because I don't want to take a huge amount of time on this and make it seem more complicated than it is, because it's not complicated at all. You can see I've got all of these dimensions set up, and we've got these lines keep showing up, and I keep saying, no line, go away, I don't want you here, and he shows up anyways. We've got all of these dimensions set up. Basically, the goal here is to start off with a consistent measurement. So this is sort of like the very back of the nacelle, and then we measure a specific amount from the back to here, and then the same amount to here, and the same amount to here, to here, to here, to here. So it's all very, very consistent all the way along. You can see here where the two come together. That's because on this side I was measuring from here to here to here to here, because the middle we don't have to worry too much about. So that's sort of the key. And I should point out, whenever you're looking at these numbers down here, for example, we've got 22 1/8 inches. Obviously that doesn't do anything for us if we're thinking in terms of blocks. But what I found out, and the way it just worked out after I set up that sphere in the middle where the bridge would be, is that all you have to do is divide any of these numbers by 10, and that gives you a rough indication of how many blocks we're looking at. So here, if we were to be very, very specific, we would have a distance of 2.2 blocks from the outer edge of the nacelle at its outer edginess up here to here would be 2 blocks, basically looking at an offset. So if we've got a rectangle, which is sort of loosely what we've already described in the game with the dimensions that we've set up, we just haven't actually connected all the blocks to make it a rectangle. We could start from the outer edge, measure in 2 blocks at this specific location, which based on the measurements is 10, 20, 30, 40 blocks, and go in 2. And that puts a marker there. And then we have another one here that's 17.36 divided by 10 is 1.7. Call it 2, maybe 2, or sorry, maybe 1.5, depending on how you want to look at it. We can do half blocks, but that's pushing it already. So we don't want to get any more complicated than that. There is some rounding involved in order to make all of this work, but it's not really that bad. So we'll call this 1.5. This 1.5 is 14. So 1.4, we'll call it 1.5. This is 10 and change. So we call that 1 block. And then that describes this line here. Once we've got all those in place, once we've done all those offsets at those specific intervals, that describes this line, and all we have to do is draw in between them to make it all work once we've got all the dots in place. The reason why you don't see anything down on the underside is because it's basically the same as what's here. It's just flipped upside down. And then over here is exactly the same. Starting from this point here, we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 blocks. Maybe 70 is where we'll stop looking at having to do any sort of offsets, because from here to here is just going to be a straight line all the way across. And then we start doing the offsets again so that we can set up, we're basically describing this curve here. We can go even more accurately if we wanted to by doing it the equivalent of every 5 blocks. So we would split these in half and then measure to here, split it in half, measure it to here. And in fact, there's a couple of spots where I did that specifically. But that gives you an idea, if we're looking at the top down of the nacelle, how we're going to come up with that specific shape and have it as close as possible to the actual design of the ship. We will be revisiting it at some point to put this detail on the underside because I think it's really cool and I think it's going to add a lot to the design if we can pull that off successfully. But for now, I just want to get the basic layout into the game and in place. And you can see down here, it's exactly the same. Exactly what we were doing up here, only we're looking at it from the side view. We've got the consistent intervals starting from here at the very back, every 10. All the way across. Here's 3 blocks, 2 blocks, 1.5 blocks, 1 block. You get the idea, right? Very simple and straightforward. Down here, we want to be a little bit careful about how we approach this because we do have this angle here. So what I did was I measured from the top here to the top of that angle, which is about 4 blocks, 4.3 blocks. And then from here down to here, I measured it. It's 8.5 blocks again, so we're going to be doing a little bit of rounding. In this case, we're going to take the 4.5, say we rounded it up, and the 8.5, that gives us 130 total. Sorry, 13 total because we're dividing by 10. 13 blocks from here down to here. This is 4 down to here, and then we have another measurement 2 blocks in to the very bottom, and that gives us the angle. It's not going to be a really busy looking angle in the game because we're only pushing it in by 2 blocks. So we're basically going to have a straight line and then we're going to step it in and then we're going to have a straight line, and that's going to be our angle. If I wanted to, I could push it just a little bit, try and get a little bit more of a clearly defined angle, and we'd break it into 3 where we've got a total of say 8.5, call it 9 blocks that we're working with. We would go down 3, step it in, down 3, step it in, and down 3. That's probably going to push us a little bit closer to what I would like to see for this back end. And then when we get down underneath here, we've got the same thing. We've got the consistent offsets all the way across, measuring up. Of course, this one is a little bit different in the offset because it's going specifically to that point there. To make sure that everything is consistent, we've got that extra measurement. We could just go off of this here. We've got another one here. And then we just do these ones. I'll be adding in another measurement probably around here just to make sure we get this transition because it's kind of coming down on a curve. And then it's very subtly changing direction and going on a little bit more of a straight line down this way. So we can account for that just by adding in an extra measurement. And then we go to the front. And this is an example, like I said, where if you wanted to be more specific about the curve or more specific about the detail, you can cut it in half, which is exactly what I've done here. Instead of 10 from here to here, we've got 5 all the way across to here, and then it goes back to 10. And that gives us enough samples off of this curve that we can reproduce it closer to what you see here. Because it's a very elegant curve, and when I see that, that's the kind of thing that I want to preserve. That's definitely the kind of thing that I want to incorporate. So in order to do that, we do a few extra samples, and we may even come back again and cut it in half one more time. I get something here, and something here, just to ensure that we're giving ourselves the best possible opportunity to reproduce what we're seeing. And then the last little detail that we'll be working on just for the layout is this down here, which is the front of the nacelle. We've got the same thing, but in this case, I've got to do the dimensions. Let's do that now, just so that we can see very quickly. If we start here, down to here. So this is a little bit different in terms of the scale relative to what we've been doing up here, because this side view, and this is actually the underside view, they're all along the same plane. So this front, or sorry, this back and this front line up perfectly with this back and this front, but this is a little bit different. The saucer section is the same width, but we're going from a slightly different perspective in this area here. So if we were to do it by every 10 blocks, the way that it's scaling currently in the game, this is only 20 blocks from here to the very bottom. So if we did it every 10 blocks, we'd miss out on a lot of detail. So here we've got it roughly every 2 blocks, and it's stepping in 3.5, 2.5, 1.5, lots of halves, which is kind of a pain, but we'll be fine. We can manage. And then we get down to 1 block. And eventually, let's do this properly. Here we go. We end up on the outer edge, which is right here. This is sort of the outermost part on this side. And once we get this done, the layout here then we just make sure that this section to this section right here is the appropriate length, or not even worry about it and just start transferring the same dimensions over to this side and do it all the way down and all the way down here, and that'll be the design. So that's whatever you want to do, whatever you want to duplicate, whatever you want to try and get into the game. That's the basics. You don't even have to do this in something like Google Sketchup. You can literally print this and do it with a ruler and a pencil. And all you're doing is finding the outer edges, and you basically want to draw a rectangle of some sort around the outer edges. It pays to make sure that it's a clean, accurate 90 degrees in all four corners kind of rectangle, no rhombus sort of things going on here. And then you do that consistent measurement all the way along, and then from each point that you have in the measurement, you measure in to see how far in you have to do the offsets to push that curve to where it needs to go. Anything you want to do, that's how it's done in order to convert something specifically. This is the first time I've gone to this kind of detail to duplicate something. I didn't do anything like this for the Millennium Falcon build, but because of the size of this ship and the amount of time and effort that I've already put into it, I wanted to make sure that it was as accurate as possible. So now that you've seen how I do it, let's go do it. We're going to hop into the game. We're going to do time lapse. We're going to put all of this in place so that you can at least see some of the profiles getting set up to start building the nacelles. Now, just to speed things up a little bit, I went ahead and I put the witness marks, those blocks that you see on top of the long strip of blocks already in place. There's one of those every 10 blocks. Makes it a little bit easier as we're going, reduces the amount of block counting that's necessary in order to get everything in place. Now, the thought occurred to me after I did all of that measuring and got everything set up that it might be easier, it might have been easier if I'd done all the measuring from a center point outward towards the edge of the profile that we were looking at, because that would have given me a more direct indication of how many blocks I needed to go. Whereas doing it the way that I did, having set up the rectangle around the perimeter and measuring in, means that's how many blocks that I have to subtract from the dimensions in that particular direction and all that other stuff. So there would have been an easier way to do it if I had have thought that far ahead, but this isn't really all that bad. We're not talking about a really large number of blocks and being manipulated by a large number of blocks. We're talking about something that's 20 blocks high, 27 blocks wide, and then we're not even worried too much about the length because we're just going by those 10 block increments. One of the things you might see me doing is occasionally placing a half block to get the profile a little bit more accurate relative to what we discovered with our measurements, and then painting it red so that I can identify immediately where the half blocks are. And that's very important, because if you just place a half block onto something with the same texture as everything else, it's very easy to lose where the half blocks are just by looking at it. So placing those, and then I give them a little shot of red paint, and that will make it a little bit easier when we start connecting the dots, so to speak, to get everything lined up and have an idea of where I want to take things when we have to make curves and bends and things like that in order to follow the contours of the profile. So it's not an especially complicated process. There's a lot of block counting, and there's a lot of looking at things and saying, is that close to what I had in mind? Is that sort of close to what the measurements indicate? And in this particular case, a lot of it is just me being really derpy and miscounting and not getting things lined up the way that they're supposed to be. It happens. It happens to me all the time. People who are smarter than me might not have the same kind of difficulty. It's just one of those things. So we did that one side, and then I went and I did the exact same thing, the exact same width on the other side to do basically create the profile from the top down kind of view, or specifically the bottom up if we were being very accurate about how we were describing things. And now we're doing basically the side profile. By extending these upwards, we're creating the points that the contour will follow to create the side profile of the nacelle. And the nice thing about it, you probably already noticed, I may not have even thought about it, but we've got mirror mode on so that all of this is being duplicated over on the other side. This is the part that I prefer to duplicate. If I could only duplicate one stage of the process, this would be the stage, because this is where all of the counting and tedious stuff takes place. I don't mind filling in the gaps by hand if I had to, but it's the measuring and the counting and the making sure that everything goes in place the way that it's supposed to, and that gets me a little bit worn down after a while. But you can see now we're doing the bottom half of the side profile, and again marking the half blocks as we go. This was where this specific spot where I just put those two pieces beside one another, that's where I was looking at the drawing, and we had kind of placed a marking a little bit off a major transition. So that's the actual transition. I went back and I remeasured it, made sure that I had everything set up the way that it was supposed to be set up, and now we're just kind of continuing on with the rest of the measurements that we got along those 10 block increments. And this one is actually going fairly straightforward, except what I'm not showing you is I completely screwed up the first time I did the top half of this side profile, and I had to remove it all and then remove it on the other side of the ship as well and start over. So there's a reason why this part is going a little bit more smoothly, and that's because it's the second time I've done it. Now we're into the first time that I've done things again. We're doing the lower half on the front, and you saw me just remove those blocks, and that's because there won't really be anything in that particular area of the ship. It's all going to be cut out. So I removed those just as a reminder to myself. We've got the blocks in place to mark that specific part of the profile, and now we're just basically marking out what will be the bottom section of the side profile for the nacelle. And if we get kind of a decent look at it already, if you just kind of follow the contours. I know I didn't stay on it for very long, but it's definitely taking shape, and it's a lot more interesting than the nacelles that I would have built in the same position. And I just did that back area as well. Like I was saying, when we were looking at the drawing, we could either do basically 2 steps. It was going in by 2 blocks, so we could do 3 steps, 3 blocks each, just to kind of accentuate that particular angle, and that's what I ended up doing. So now the last thing that remains is to do the front profile, which I'm putting towards the middle of the nacelle because it's going to change and it's going to shift as we go back and forth from front to back. But this is going to be the general shape that we're going to be looking at for the front profile. And realistically speaking, it didn't really take all that long. I'm very, very happy with the way it turned out in terms of its fidelity, how close it is to the actual nacelle looking at the drawings. And so the next episode, we're going to start filling in the gaps. We're going to basically fill in the contours. We're just going to continue making lines. Then we're going to get rid of all this stuff in the middle, all of the temporary lines that we're placing now just to measure everything. And then we begin the process of filling in the whole thing, giving it an actual substantial form. Because this is basically where we're going to be housing a lot of thrusters. If we want to be able to move this ship, it's going to need a lot of thrusters, and they're all going to be going in the nacelles. So if you want to be notified about the next video in the series, subscribe to my channel or follow me on Twitter. Links for Twitter in the information box below the video. Leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.